Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the OK Grognard Show. It is Saturday, November 21st, 2020, 10 a.m. Central, in beautiful Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. Well, it's Saturday, and that means it's GM Review Day. And, I'd been looking through the D&D 3.5 Dungeon Master's Guide for some other things, and fell down a bit of a rabbit's hole. Started looking through it, and I thought, I'm not saying anybody should buy a collectible copy of the 3.5 Dungeon Master's Guide. And I'm not saying anybody should necessarily play 3rd edition in any form, 3.5, 3.0, Pathfinder. All of it, in my opinion, falls under 3.xe. And I'm not saying it's a bad system. It's definitely juicy and complex from a player option, from a well-defined player's options. Make that clear, because there's a lot of options in every RPG. They're just not necessarily defined. What you get in a rules-heavy system, like any of the 3rd edition stuff, and rules heavy is not a derogatory term, it's just a statement of fact that there's a lot of definition to the rules. Now, of course, in 3rd edition, you have the explicit statement of a rule 0, the idea that any and all rules are guidelines and the DM can just remove them if they so desire, ignore them in a situation or in total. DMs have the final say in any adjudication. But I think what you find with players, for the most part, of a lot of rules-heavy games, is a reliance on those rules and a feeling. You should put these on. A feeling that the game is unfair if the rules aren't adhered to in a manner that they've come to expect. If the rules are not followed as written, then I think a lot of players feel like that can't be done on the fly, or shouldn't be. If you want to change the game, let everybody know up front. Because people play rules-heavy games often because they like that structure. They don't like structure being messed with on the fly. They are less annoyed by rules that are changed up front and agreed upon. So if you gather up a bunch of players for a game of Dungeons and Dragons 3.5, you probably need to tell them in advance if there are any rules that you've changed. If you really want to keep the peace and go into it on an equal footing, making sure that everybody is not going to be surprised or blindsided by some adjustment that you feel is a necessary change. And hey, more power to you. If you want to change some rules, by all means, change some rules. Never let it be said by me that for your game you shouldn't change some rules. Do as you will. I change a few in 1st edition. I change a few in every edition I've ever run or played. Every game. Even in even in games that are not D&D or Pathfinder. I have made some rules changes. Often it is to port a rule in from another game that I've run or played that I felt addressed a situation in a game that comes up often enough that it could use a rule. Just to keep people on the same page. Well, it's Saturday. It's the last day of week 33 of the OK Grognard Show. We are on episode 254. Just a couple of things to say in the middle here. Maybe this is like a little commercial, right? Creative Mountain Games, my e-publishing, erstwhile e-publishing company. My on again, off again. It's still a company. I don't do a lot with it, really. I did in the early 2000s, and then I did a little less in the late 2000s, and then I do a little bit here and a little bit there, but not a lot in the 2010s. Nevertheless, this December marks the 20th anniversary of CMG. So I started that when I was in my late 30s. My God, where did the time go? I have just pissed it away. Oh, well, anyway. The point being, I plan to do some fun stuff. I also plan to take a break from the OK Grognard Show at the end of the year. I was thinking about this the other day. 254 shows. I like doing this every day. I really do enjoy it. But I think I need to take some breaks from it occasionally. Maybe a couple of weeks throughout the year. I think one good week to do that would probably be Christmas through New Year. Maybe, right? What's that? 25th, 26th, 27th, 28th, 29th, 30th, 31. And then come back on the 1st. So I take a full 7 days at the end of the year. Take off the 25th and come back on the 1st. I think that'd be a good break from doing the show. It'd give me a chance to recharge, maybe duck my head into some writing or something that lost some momentum during the course of the year. Could be fun. We will see. I wanted to talk a bit more about 3.5 and why I'm bothering to put it up as a GM review item. Let's have a look here. Oop, let's do this. Here we go. There's the cover. $320 pages. It's a lot of stuff. A lot of stuff to read. And I'll tell you what, I'll just tell you right out, I do think that if you can get if you don't mind reading PDFs and having a PDF copy of something, go pay for the PDF of this. If you can find a used copy that isn't exorbitant, because 3.0 not so much, 3.5 gets a little expensive, but I wouldn't even pick up the 3.0. I would just get the 3.5 and just get a more beat up copy if you really need a physical copy. If you like collecting, get a nice one. But I don't know. Running the game. A nice chunk right at the beginning, using the rules. Boom, 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 boom. Another 20 pages of that. After 20 pages of running the game. Adventures broken out. Now, remember that 3.5 being rules heavy, a lot of stuff in this adventure talk is going to be about working the mechanics into whatever adventures you create. Non-player characters, there are detailed non-player character classes, and they go into how to use the statistics for them, and there's a little section on fleshing them out, and that's not a bad thing. We'll maybe take a look at that. It has a section on campaigns from about 130 to 100, about 30 pages of that. Characters are broken down, including lots of prestige classes, which they don't put in the player's handbook. These are... I liked the concept of them. They were basically half subclasses. So after you hit a certain number of prerequisites, kind of like the first edition Bard originally was, you put your time into a kind of a base class, and then once you hit a certain level, provided you had certain feats had been chosen, which is kind of like if you're not familiar, kind of like a special thing you can do. I don't want to say trick, but some sort of expert maneuver or ability that you've learned to do. If you have these prerequisites, then you can move into a prestige class, which is a continuation, much like, imagine in first edition if you could only be a paladin after having been a regular fighter for 5 levels, and also having at least a 17 or 18 charisma, and having and being a lawful good alignment. So provided you have those prerequisites after 5th level, for instance, if Paladin was a prestige class, you could move into Paladin and then start gaining levels as a Paladin, and with that would come special abilities like a Paladin has, but you get those by then becoming that. So that's basically how a prestige class works, and I thought it was pretty neat. But again, this is a rules-heavy system where there's a lot of detail, a lot of definition in how absolutely everything works. And, I'm not talking about how you tie your shoes, but definitely how you swing a sword or cast a spell, how you gain those abilities. You had to take feats that would allow you. If you were a fighter, you would automatically have like martial weapons abilities, which are a particular range of weapons, longsword and other weapons of war. But if you weren't a fighter, you didn't automatically have the ability to use those effectively. Now, anybody can actually pick up an object and swing it around, right? So you would have minuses if you didn't have a feat in that. So again, very detailed, a lot of definition in how the rules worked. Sections in the character classes on familiars and mounts and animal companions. Epic characters. There's a whole section on magic items, obviously. It's the DMG, and that's always the purview of the DM to decide what sorts of magic were going to be in this world. So that is always off to the side. You don't want players having ready access to that when they're early on, obviously. Players will seek that stuff out. They will buy their own Dungeon Master's Guide. So it's all broken down. It's 320 pages, but it's in the back index. It has a regular index, a list of the sidebars, and a list of numbered tables, much like the first edition DMG has the tables broken out in the toward the end of the table of contents. The glossary has special abilities mentioned in it. Condition summary, because in 3rd edition, anything that affected you was considered a condition, whether it was you being fatigued, you being poisoned, you being under the effects of a fear, or there were dozens of them, really, once the game was finally mothballed or replaced by 4th edition. People still play 3.5, and rightfully so. It's a solid system. I wanted to jump to something because there's a lot of advice in any Dungeon Master's Guide, and often it's very good advice, but it's also true that very good advice can sometimes not be worded as well as it can. So, in the section on campaigns, right? Is it campaigns? Creating adventures. Let's see. Yeah, adventures. There is what they call motivation for adventures. Oops, what's going on with this? I gotta do this. I gotta play around with this. I gotta make it scrollable. Sorry about that. Pardon me. Play around with that a little more. We'll move to there. All right. They put something called under motivation, and I'll discuss why I think this could have been written a little differently if it was to speak to the way I want to run a game. Motivation is what drives the adventure. It's what gets the PCs involved in whatever you have designed for them to do. If the PCs aren't motivated, they won't do what you want them to. And all your work will be wasted. Greed, fear, revenge, need, morality, anger, and curiosity are all powerful motivators. So, of course, it's fun. Never forget that last one. Never forget. Writing an adventure with strong motivation is really a matter of knowing what style of game you and your players prefer. See page 7 for a discussion of different play styles. There's another section worth reading. I mean, you might not agree with everything that's written in here, but it's well worth knowing how some other people perceive the best way to run a game, or at least one way to run a game, or multiple ways to run a game, because they talk about a number of things in here. So they talk about this as being a motivation, and let me get into why. Tailor or status quo. I like the ideas behind this section. I would have framed them differently. Tailored motivations are the ones that you have specifically designed with your group's PCs in mind. Here are just a few of the many possible examples. The PCs are a hardened group of mercenaries, not interested in the pleas of innocence or the stories of evil that threaten some good kingdom. However, they are quite interested in gold. That's your mercenaries' motivation, greed. Melee, the wizard, has been slain by the gargoyles in the Caverns of Dread. Now the other PCs seek a means to raise her. They know of a good-hearted cleric of Pelor to the south, in the city of Divers. That's how we know Greyhawk is the default setting, right? They use the Greyhawk gods, Greyhawk places in their examples. They arrive, the cleric is willing to raise Melee, but only if the PCs help him by ridding the temple's lower level of were-rats. Rats in the basement. Okay, well, we got other motivations here, and they're based off of that list of greed, gold, other motivations. The status quo motivation isn't really a motivation in the strictest sense of the word. This is how this breaks down, right? I mean, I set up a premise, and I say there are two sides to it, and when I get to describing the second side, I say, well, it's not really a... So, the idea behind this, tailored and status quo, as the types of creations you make as a DM, whether they are just my setting, my world, my game world for the sake of my game world, status quo, you go there at 5th level, you're going to run into the same type of stuff as you would run into if you go there at 10th level. That's what exists there. That's what is status quo for that area. Tailored, I go there at 5th level, I run into 10 zombies. I row there at 10th level, I run into 100 zombies. I've tailored it because your level requires a challenge that is a bit beefier. Tailored encounters. Anyway, I don't see necessarily how that works with motivation. I think they wanted to write something about motivation, but they had this other idea about creation, and they tried to wedge it into this, under this topic heading. Status quo motivation isn't really a motivation in the strict sense of the word. In fact, it's the fact that, for instance, adventure awaits in the Lost Valley for anyone who dares to brave the wyvern-haunted cliffs that surround the place. The PCs can go there or not, depending on how they feel. While a tailored motivation is good for ensuring that the PCs end up in an adventure that you have designed, and for letting players feel that their characters have a real place in the world, a status quo motivation allows you to set up situations unrelated to the PCs specifically. Doing this creates a sense of perspective, the feeling that the campaign world is a real place that extends beyond the PCs. Okay, so then it gets into structure of adventures and whatnot. I don't think they were off base trying to create a topic header at the beginning of this chapter on creating adventures about motivations. I also don't think it was bad that they created information or details about how these two types of creations are separate from one another. I think both of those are things that needed to be addressed in a chapter on creating adventures or creating a setting in general. And adventures are a discrete portion of a campaign. And this is why I separate campaign discussion from world building. Well, the campaign takes place in the world. In my mind, world building is status quo. You create that stuff not necessarily at all with any... I mean, you can't help it if some characters or players that play in your game have created characters that are in the back of your mind when you are creating stuff. And it's okay to create stuff with characters in your mind, but it should be its own thing, right? Not everything needs to be a reflection of the PCs. Certainly some stuff should. If they exist in the world, then they have an impact on it, even in their downtime, and even in their backstory, and even after they've died, other characters remember those PCs and will be affected, or other NPCs and player characters will be affected in their decision making based on what has come in your game, in your campaign game over time. So it's worth keeping all that in mind. So this section, above all else, was what I'd been focused on when I did this. Hey, if you want to, and I'll put a link in the show notes, there is this whole section of let me go all the way to the front. Dungeons & Dragons Play More 3 accessory updates. See all the books, right? There will be a link in the show notes that goes to a page on Wizard's site that details the differences between, or the changes from 3rd edition to 3.5. There'll also be a link in the show notes that detail, I think it's a Reddit link, where they took up the topic of what's different from the 3.0 to the 3.5 player's handbook. Now, I know that doesn't necessarily have much to do with the Dungeon Master's Guide, but I think that is stuff that is worth noting, in part because it is kind of the main core book, right? You can run games technically without the monster manual or the DMG, but you really do need to have a player's handbook to get some idea of how that game should work on one side of the screen. The rest of it you can make up based off of that. You can extrapolate a lot of things about the way the game runs. I think you need it, but I think you can do it without if you have to. Anyway, so the 3.5 DMG has a lot of sections in here on running games and creating material for games. And if you don't mind reading between the lines when they start getting into the rules-specific, mechanic-specific stuff, then there's a lot of wisdom to be had in here. And if you can grab a PDF for $10 or less, or you can grab a copy of the book for $20 or less, I think it's worth it. I think it's worth it just to pick through it and read stuff. You've spent $20 on a lot worse than this. So do as you will, but that's my suggestion. So I would give well, you know what? Let's be honest. If I put something on the GM review thing, it's because I think highly enough of it. I don't spend any time slamming things on my show. I might be picayune about certain details, like I was today with this motivation tailored / status quo misstep that I see in how this was put together. But for the most part, if I'm putting something up on here, it's because I think it's worth it for most people to maybe pick it up or get a hold of it if you can. So there you go. That's how that works. Anyway, well, time on a wall. We're just about there. So let's do this. Let's say thanks very much to anyone who follows the channel for chiming in on the stream chat when you're here. I appreciate it. It gets you on the list. We do a weekly drawing from the list. We take somebody's name, we contact them, we give something to them just as a kind of a gratitude thing. It's not a contest. You don't have to pay anything to enter. We only ask that you follow the channel and chime in on the stream chat during a live stream, because that's our one way of discerning that you are not a bot. And there's nothing worse than trying to find a bot and track them down and get their address so you can send them something out of gratitude, because they don't exist. And that's no good. Anyway, come on back tomorrow, 10 a.m., for a rules retrospective. Not sure what we're going to be looking at. Maybe we'll pick up some of that character creation stuff or adventure creation stuff and follow up on it this weekend from first edition or from original D&D. That might be a worthwhile chase down. Weekly news and announcements on Monday, cartography and world building on Tuesday, campaign discussion on Wednesday, GMing tips on Thursday, building adventures on Friday, back around the horn to GM reviews next Saturday. If you're catching up with us on YouTube, thank you very much. Please subscribe to the channel and also give us a thumbs up on any videos you watch that you enjoy. If you have some constructive criticism or just want to give us an attaboy, feel free to make a comment in the comment section. We appreciate your help in us making the show better. So it's the OK Grognard Show from beautiful Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. Bye-bye.